On November 8th at 6:30 a.m., a fire started near Pulga, California in the Campfire Creek area. The winds were heavy the entire night before and gusting at 60+ miles an hour. By 8 a.m., the fire reached the town of Paradise, part of a community known as The Ridge, where we have called home since October of 2003. By 10:45 a.m., the fire had engulfed 20,000 acres and was rapidly burning the entire eastern area of Paradise and moving quickly west, driven by the heavy winds. By late afternoon, the entire Paradise area was virtually destroyed, up to 10,000 structures completely gone. The winds slowed down in the afternoon and then burned available fuel in all directions and moved into the Magalia area where we live. This disaster affected our family greatly, even though we consider ourselves extremely fortunate. This video is a memorial of this event and how it affected our family. First, let me take 90 seconds to go back and tell you how we got here from the Los Angeles area. My parents didn't have the greatest start. They were married at 16 and I came along a few months later, and my brother Danny 2 years after that. My parents struggled to keep our family together, and my father struggled with alcohol and violence and was not around very much. When I was 12 years old and when it seemed our family would not stay intact, my father went to jail, found God, quit drinking, asked for forgiveness, and turned his life around all in the same week. From that point, our father became our dad. He sold some possessions to buy a boat so we could spend time camping and going to the lake. This was the start of my love of the lake and the outdoors. We visited many lakes, and when I was 14, we went on vacation to Lake Shasta in Northern California. From that day forward, I always dreamed of someday living in Northern California and living near one of the many amazing lakes in the area. My dad also had the same dream. I was married at 20 and started my family quickly. 10 years later, I started my own business and worked hard, but just didn't feel like I could spend enough quality time with my family, especially on the lake, which we loved. In 2003, due to the housing bubble, we had the opportunity to sell our nice home in Simi Valley for much more than it was worth and found our way to the Ridge and settled in this beautiful little house in the Paradise Pines. We went to Lake Oroville 3 times a week when it was warm, and this was the life I had always dreamed of, yet I felt guilty. This was also the life my dad always dreamed of, and he also dreamed of coming to a place like this and taking in as many neglected children that he and my mom could handle. I called him often to tell him this was the place that he dreamed of and helped him find a place with some land where he could start his dream and take in all of those kids. They moved up within a year and immediately began the process to take in those kids, and they ended up adopting 10 kids over the next few years. We loved our house in the Pines, but after 7 years in 2010 had the opportunity to move to the North Coodalink area on this beautiful 26-acre ranch. We were still just 5 miles from my parents' home on South Coodalink. There were 2 unusual things about the morning of the fire. The first was that the rains were late. The rainy season around here starts on November 1st, and you can usually count on that. The second was that I didn't get much sleep because the wind was howling overnight. It was rattling the house. Our house is sheltered by the natural topography and the trees, and we usually don't feel the wind unless it's very strong. Due to these 2 circumstances, we had received warnings over the previous few days that pg&e may cut power to us due to high winds and fire danger, so we had filled up all of our gas containers and tested our generators. I had a meeting at 6 a.m. and by 7 a.m. Amy already saw the smoke while feeding the animals and checked the CAL FIRE website for any notices, but there weren't any yet. Amy always fears the worst, and the smoke looked very bad, and she warned me to be prepared to evacuate. Amy took these pictures before 9 a.m. and the smoke looked immense, but we smelled nothing because the winds were blowing the fire away south and east. By 9:30 a.m. we lost power and heard of people evacuating for Paradise. At 9:45 a.m. we lost all communications along with the power, and we started to see people evacuating with trucks and trailers hastily filled with belongings going by our gate down the road. That is an ominous sign, because if people are using Coodalink Road to evacuate, it means that they can't go down the hill and they can't go up the hill over the Magalia Reservoir Bridge. I told RJ and Emmy to start packing, and everyone was starting to get very nervous. We had some work being done in our house, and the worker Clay, who lived in Paradise with his family, was there, and along with Amy we're starting to panic a bit that we needed to evacuate immediately. They had good reason. From where we stood, it looked like the fire was upon us and we had to go. But I had a problem. My parents had left for out of town early that morning for a seminar in Canada, and we were supposed to pick up and be responsible for several of their teenage kids. They lived 5 miles down the road directly between us and Paradise. Amy had told all of them to get to our house, the entire house full of kids and my sister's young family that live in Magalia in the Paradise Pines. They started to arrive around 9:45 a.m., but they were not all on our property, and I couldn't leave until they were all there. We had no communication and no way of knowing how close the danger was, and from what we could see of the smoke, the fire was moving fast and growing quickly. I got the idea to put my drone in the air so I could see exactly where the fire was and figure out what to do. The good news was that it seemed like the fire was in Paradise. The bad news is that it looked like the entire town of Paradise was completely engulfed in fire. How could that be? The fire seemed far enough away for us to wait, but we sent RJ and Emmy on their way. My sister that lived in Magalia and her family were now safe on our property, and so were several of the kids, but we were missing 4 of them, ages 14 to 17, 3 boys and a girl, one of them severely delayed. They were supposed to be in school in Paradise that morning, and I had to find a way to make sure they were safe before I could leave, because my parents were in the air flying to Canada, and the kids would feel like they needed to get back home, up the hill, but they should go down the hill to Chico where it is safe and just wait. I drove down Koodaling towards Paradise to see if I could make a signal and make contact. There is a tiny section of road near the border of Paradise where you can pick up a cell signal from Chico. There were several people there, and the sheriff had set up a roadblock on the corner of Koodaling and Skyway. I called my dad. He was on a layover and already heard what was going on. He said he had contact with the 4 missing kids and was going to tell them to go to Chico, and we set a place to meet when we did evacuate. My dad was nervous and he asked me, "How bad is it? Should we turn right around?" I told them this is the worst that I have ever seen up here. I think Paradise is completely on fire, but there isn't anything you can do. I also told him I would get everybody out as best I could. I told him I would come back to the signal in an hour or so to make sure the kids got the message, and told him we were using my drone to watch the fire. Around noon I went to the signal spot, and before I could call my dad I was flagged down by someone asking for help looking for his 16-year-old son. His son was at the Fast Trip gas station just a few thousand feet past the roadblock and told his dad that he had to run from his car that burst into flames and was going to try to walk to where we were. The father lost contact and couldn't get past the roadblock. The roadblock was not just the sheriff. There were flames and down power lines and thick, acrid smoke. It was apocalyptic. I called my dad and got some bad news. He told the kids to go to the restaurant in Chico and just wait for us to meet, but for some reason they tried to come up the hill and they were able to call from across the street from the same Fast Trip gas station. They were trapped. I went to the sheriff's officer at the roadblock and told her my brothers and sister were stuck just a few thousand feet away. We needed to get to them. She explained there were many people in that spot, and there were firemen and police there sheltering in place with the trapped people. They were all trapped and no one was going in or out. I called my dad and gave him the news and told him to pray. I would do the best I could. A couple of hours later, I was at the roadblock and signal spot again, and I still couldn't get through to my brothers and sister, and they said the people were all still trapped. I still felt okay not evacuating yet, and I needed to make sure these kids got out. I kept coming back and I kept flying my drone. Later in the afternoon, around 4 p.m., I came down again and it was much worse. The smoke was thickening and the flames were starting to drive down the canyon up Koodaling. The southeasterly winds had slowed way down and now the fire was just burning fuel in every direction. When I talked to the sheriff, she had tears in her eyes and told me to hope for the best. She pointed out some help had arrived, and I saw a Black Hawk helicopter just like this one pulling water from the Magalia Reservoir maybe 1,000 feet away or so from me, and then dumping water on the area where the kids were being sheltered. The helicopter was going back and forth as fast as it could, dumping water. I was grateful, but I felt very helpless to not be able to get to those kids, and I still had to call my dad again. I told him what was going on and spoke to him man to man, that this seemed like it may not end well and we could only pray. I told him I still wouldn't leave as long as possible without putting the rest of the family in danger. I came down again just after dark and it was like a scene from Apocalypse Now. The sheriff and roadblock were gone. There was no need. Flames were everywhere in the entire old Magalia area, and into the Paradise Pines had been completely ravaged by fire and were still burning at both sides of the road. I could not get down to the spot where I knew the kids were sheltered in place due to fire and power lines across the road. My hands were shaking as I called my dad. When he picked up, he had good news. The kids and other trapped people were stuck with the firemen and police in that spot for over 9 hours, but they were finally able to get down the hill. Thank God. I spoke to some firemen that I found resting on the corner near where the roadblock was. One of them looked at me with sweaty eyes and told me, "Paradise is gone. It's all gone." I asked them if they thought this fire in the canyon behind us was likely to burn all the way to my house. There were no firemen working those flames at the moment, and there was no wind and it was moving slow. They told me they just didn't know. It was dark now, and the road over the mountain to evacuate is an adventure during the day but can be very treacherous in weather or at night. Add to that I had 5 cars of people and animals and 3 very inexperienced drivers. One of them didn't even have their license yet. Everything was prepared and the cars were all ready to go. I set my alarm for 2 a.m. and was going to check the location of the fire and try to leave at first light. I didn't want to make this trip at night over a treacherous mountain road with other people with big trailers and old cars all trying to get over at the same time. I woke up at 2 a.m. and saw a truck with flashing lights going up and down Kudelink. I jumped in my truck and tracked him down. It was the Forest Service, and they told me that I needed to knock on any doors that I know of if anyone was still at home and get out with them. The fire was now no more than a mile down the road and had burned all of the homes on Kudelink up to that point, which includes my parents' home. I couldn't fly my drone, but I could see the red glow of flames directly to the east of us behind our property, which was a very ominous sign. I wasn't able to wait to first light, and so I had to make a rough decision. I felt like I needed to focus on getting these kids and other families safely evacuated to Chico, and I wasn't able to be able to tow a trailer. That meant I had to leave the animals, 3 goats and Waffles the donkey. We put them in the paddock where they had a lot of room around them without fuel, and I knew that to give them a fighting chance, I had to leave our guardian dog with them, our beloved Mastiff Zoe. Of course, Zoe is a loved pet, but when you live on a small ranch like this, animals like Zoe are more than pets. They have a job. Tonight I was going to ask Zoe to do her job, and I may not see her again. I got 5 walkie-talkies together and talked to everyone about exactly what we were going to do and what to do if there was a problem, made sure my rifle was ready to go, and we hit the road. The road from Sterling City to Inskip was 1 lane and a drop-off on one side, but everyone did well, and I called out on the walkie-talkies every few minutes. This is the part where I sing praise to our first responders. We evacuated smoothly through that rough road because they were there in force. They were keeping people safe, keeping cars off the road if they couldn't make it, and sometimes were just parked and sleeping on the side of the road ready to go at a moment's notice. Throughout this entire catastrophe, over this entire month, I have been very proud of our first responders and have nothing bad to say. But when I was leading all of these people over the mountain at 2:30 a.m., I can't tell you how thankful I was for how professional the first responders were. And remember that many of them lost their homes. We made it out, and I was able to call my dad and found that he was back in Oroville, and so he was able to talk to all of his family and take responsibility for them. Everyone was safe. I now could focus on finding a place to stay and figure out how to rescue my animals, which turned out not to be as easy as I hoped it would be. We had given the animals extra food, but watching the news and the satellite fire detection maps, the fire was very close and getting even closer to our home. We needed to get our animals rescued. We tried ourselves to no avail and then contacted several licensed animal rescue organizations, and they tried but couldn't get through. 3 days later on Sunday, we were nervous that the animals were not going to make it. We were definitely more worried about our animals than our property. On Sunday, we got word from a wakesurf friend that saw our plight on Facebook. Dan Savaggio was able to get permission and came up with a stock trailer, and he was able to pick up RJ and Emmy to try to get our animals. They drove through the carnage, and you can listen here to Emmy's voice as she is nervous that the animals had made it.
Oh, it should be solar power. I see the goaties, I see Waffles. I see them. Hi, Waffles. They're okay. Oh my goodness. Zoe! Hi, Zoe! Come here, girl! Waffles! Oh, they're okay.
They were safe. All of the animals were accounted for, and thanks to our son-in-law's family, the Huskies, our animals had a place to stay during the evacuation. We were able to take advantage of my daughter and son-in-law's Airbnb rental in Chico. It was a small, self-contained, 1-bedroom apartment for Amy, Jesse, and I, and 3 dogs and our crazy barn cat. It was a bit crowded, but we made it home. Perfectly fine for up to a week, but after 3 weeks, I was losing my mind. We finally gained access to our property, and even though we still didn't have full services, we found our property unscathed and we felt very thankful. Our entire neighborhood was spared. I also found that my parents' house was spared. Their area and a few neighbors lost their homes, but their house was okay. However, my dad had built a large workshop to teach the kids vocational skills and it was burnt to the ground. We removed our refrigerator and freezer to be dumped due to the long time without power. It was Sunday and I had some time and I put up my drone. I first put the drone up around our home and found the fire did come within about 2,000 feet of our house, but fortunately we are bordered by Paradise Lake on the south and then natural canyons and logging roads to the east. Those barriers saved our neighborhood, but the entire South Coolink area was mostly destroyed. The rains had finally started 13 days after the fire, and it was a beautiful clear day, so I jumped in my Mustang with Jesse and my drone to see how far I could get into town and see what services we had and survey the damage. I was not prepared for what I found. Of course, I knew that almost 100 people died in the area and over 90% of the structures in Paradise were gone, and about half of the homes in Magalia. Knowing these details and seeing them reported on TV doesn't prepare you for seeing it firsthand. Homes were reduced to concrete foundations and ash. Cars were melted to the road. Some of the few commercial buildings in Magalia were okay, but True Value and Dolly-O's was gone. At least half of Paradise Pines, where we lived for 7 years, and all of Old Magalia was complete destruction. Except for the standing burnt trees and a few unscathed structures, it was like a nuclear blast went off. I could see where my brothers and sisters were sheltered and how close I was to them, yet I could do nothing. Over the next week or so, I was able to fly my drone in several areas and was able to see the devastation up close. It was heartbreaking. This area, the Ridge, has been my home for the last 15 years and where I have chosen to raise my kids. We have adopted this community as our home, and I felt like I was witnessing the loss of a family member. Here in Central Paradise is where my friend Dennis has his PB's propeller shop, and it's gone. I had the opportunity in July to make a video for him, and I used my drone, so I have the before and the after. Remember this beautiful little house that we moved into in 2003? So many great memories here, like the time Jessie was practicing her ollies and 180s on the porch.
Almost. Do another one. Do another 180. Try to do a 180.
There were the family pictures. And then the time RJ made a ramp in our yard to jump with his bike and convinced his little brother and sister they could do it also, which didn't go well.
Come on, stop being a baby and just do it. Faster, Thomas, faster. You should have seen that. It was pretty nasty. Remember, pedal fast.
I flew over the neighborhood in the Paradise Pines on West Park Drive, and like so many other areas in Magalia and Paradise, it was near complete devastation. It was very sad to see and think of all those memories burned to ash. Within about a week, I was able to drive into the area and see it up close, and again, I was not prepared. There were so many deer wandering confused through the area. It was a strange sight. It was like they had no fear of me, which is not normal, and they didn't know what to do. When I got to our old house, I got out of the car and stood at the driveway, and I have to say, I cried like a little baby. Not just for the memories we had here, but it just put into perspective the impact this fire had on this community to see this beautiful little house turn to this. I began to understand a scene that I had been seeing a lot over the recent weeks. People just standing and staring over the ash and concrete where their homes used to be. Several folks from our wake surf community that have been on this channel lost their homes, like the Commence and the Perkins families. I am sure there are several more since just about anyone from Paradise lost their home. I did find one tremendous bright spot in my surveying. When I watched the news and looked at the satellite infrared fire detection images of the area, it looked like our marina was completely engulfed in the fire. But when I put my drone up and surveyed the marina, it looked perfectly intact. We are so happy about this because it means that we can continue our favorite pastime while the community recovers. I don't think I have ever looked forward to wake surfing in the spring like I am now. I am sure our wake surf community on Lake Oroville may be a bit smaller, but it will continue to thrive and we will be right here doing our part to support it. I don't know how it's going to work without any hotels, but somehow the polar bear event has to return to Lake Oroville. My family has decided we are not going anywhere. As I went back home to Chico, taking the route over the top of the mountain, I took a minute to enjoy the beauty of the area. It was these mountain roads that Amy and I had explored on a motorcycle in 1999 that brought us here. Even after the devastation a few miles back, it was still gorgeous here. So at the summit of the mountain, around Humbug Summit, I put up my drone again. From here, the damage from the fire seems so far away, so small. I don't want to minimize the pain or suffering some families may have fared in this tragedy. I know that we have been very fortunate. But seeing this beauty and this perspective, I realize that this area will restore. While the fire may have been the harbinger of utter destruction, it is also the catalyst for renewal. I stopped at the creek in Butte Meadows. I remembered the colors I saw for the first time on the elephant ears in the creek bed in 1999. Then, I thought, I wish I could move here and raise my family here someday. I was able to realize that dream, and nothing has changed. We have decided to stay, and we have the means to leave this area and start over somewhere else, but like I said, this area has become a part of my family, and this ranch is where I want to retire with my wife. It is going to be very inconvenient for a while, but the rest of the community needs our help, and we are committed to doing what we can. We are excited to see how Paradise and Magalia, otherwise known as the Ridge, will be restored beyond its former glory. We want a first row seat, and we want a hand in its restoration.